Move to the regular agenda this evening. That is item 8. It begins that. Ordinance 2022-1, ordinance to adopt the FY23 budget, second reading and public hearing. Mr. Heisman?
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Board. Staff is pleased to be presenting the proposed FY23 budget to the community this evening, here at second reading and at our public hearing. This evening's presentation has been designed with the hopes of educating our community about the budget formation process, current higher-level considerations that influence our budget decisions, and FY23 budget priorities and our challenges. It will also provide a financial overview of each of the city's major funds. The 6-month budget formation and approval process has been managed by the city's budget and performance team, sitting before you here this evening, led by Director Adrian Royals, and has been skillfully executed by our budget and performance manager, Sherry Rowell, and analyst Dakisha Fondin. This team has continued our nearly 40-year tradition of budget excellence in creating and winning annual Distinguished Budget Presentation Awards from the Government Finance Office Association. This year was no exception, and as they have done some of their best work to date, in my opinion, and they have completed it with one less person than normal. The formal budget process began by engaging the community through the Financial Advisory Commission. At the start of this calendar year, the FAC met a total of 5 times through April and reviewed and voted on each fund. Each of those funds you'll be presented with this evening. And at the conclusion of tonight's presentation, we'll hear from Chair Michael McLaughlin, who will speak on behalf of the FAC. As with every year, staff appreciates the time and expertise that each FAC commissioner gives. It is truly a commitment, and at times, sometimes it requires sacrifice on their part. But our entire team truly values their advice and their involvement in the process. Outside of our quarterly vision and work sessions with the BMA, this governing body is also woven into the actual budget calendar, and it culminates in a 3-reading process as defined by our charter. As you can see on this slide, a total of 10 public meetings were held overall regarding the development of the budget that you have before you here this evening. There are a number of higher-level considerations that influence and inform staff's decisions regarding the development of our proposed annual financial plan. Number one, first of all, staff always strives to prepare an operationally balanced budget with no use of one-time revenues to fund ongoing city operations. This budget does that. Number two, preserving our core service levels, primarily within public safety, is always a top priority. Number three, since their inception in 2013-14, the city has and will continue to make the Germantown Municipal School District a core priority. Number four, the community's vision and values, as captured in the newly adopted Germantown Forward 2035 strategic plan, guides every policy decision made, including our most impactful annual policy document, this annual budget, which determines our resource allocation and ultimately where our investments are made. Mayor, let me pause here and check this box for you. Staff believes the proposed budget presented this evening is in compliance with strategic objective number 5 within City Services and Finance, key performance area. Within the proposed FY23 budget, the city's services are being used effectively in high priority areas. And number 5, finally, a 6-year capital improvement program has been completed concurrently with the annual budget, as required by city charter. With the amount of state and federal funding available through the American Rescue Plan, our extended budget team has been hyper-focused on making optimal use of the city's resources in order to maximize the use of available state and federal dollars. Director Royals will go more in depth on this topic shortly, and Analyst Fondin will also highlight some of the FY23's upcoming projects later in this presentation. I believe at the 3rd reading we'll have a presentation on the CIP from our CIP manager, Emily Zimmer. In addition to these 5 areas of consideration, there are 4 core priorities that have been emphasized by city administration within the proposed annual financial plan. The large majority of the city's resources in FY23 have been allocated to support either one of our public safety departments, or to invest in our infrastructure, our municipal school district, or our park system. Other budget priorities are also set during quarterly vision and work sessions with this governing body. Just a few noteworthy projects identified by members of this BMA and funded within this FY23 budget are a comprehensive land use planning updates to the city's master plan, the implementation of a seasonal code compliance and educational program, the completion of a community senior needs assessment, and beautification enhancements during the holiday season in the Old Germantown District. Director Royals will take over from here, but before diving into each of the city's funds, she will begin by addressing some of the challenges we have and are continuing to work through as part of the development budget, or the budget development and approval process. Director Royals.
So if anybody paid any attention to the news today, you saw the stock market. I believe it was down 900 points. Last time I looked, it was down 900 points. So this sort of feeds into the development of the budget. As we've gone through COVID and now the possibility of recession, we have been managing uncertainty through, I would say, the past 3 budget cycles. We have gone through this type of economic uncertainty. And we have some recession indicators that are popping up. Again, as if you saw the stock market today, I believe the yield curve inverted today as well. So that would be the second time it's inverted since March. And when the yield curve inverts, it's usually an indication that recession's on its way within the next 1 to 2 years. We've also had shrinkage in gross domestic product, which is also a sign of recession. So with that in mind, we wanted to make sure that we built a budget around the possibility of recession and hopefully not be scrambling mid-year having to pull back expenses. So as I go through it, you'll see where I've adjusted, or we have adjusted the revenues to kind of go through that. One of the other areas is the dominance, leaning on sales tax a little bit, dependency. This is a good and bad. And I'm going to go through the good part of that, but also part of the bad is the fact that it is subject to the elasticity of that tax and can expand and contract with the economy. And then inflation. And anybody been to the gas pumps lately knows that inflation, I believe we're at 8.6% at this point. We have tried to build in some inflation proofing a little bit with increased expenses. We've increased the amount of petroleum and other supply and materials costs. Hopefully there'll be enough. At this point, I have my fingers crossed as we continue to go up, but hopefully this will be fine. And then finally, COVID had the great resignation, and if anybody has tried to hire anybody recently, you know how difficult that is. In fact, as we just stated, we're down 1. So Sherry and Nikisha has done the budget with just the 2 of them with a 3-person job. And our analysts left in February, and we have not been able to hire anyone as of yet. So we see the work of this in the budget and performance team. I do want to mention that in the human resource section, it includes a 4% merit pool. When HR met with the city's labor market consultant, they actually suggested a 6 to 7% increase. I'm sure part of that had to do with the inflation on top of it. But that doesn't speak to affordability. And so as we met and HR met with the PAC, the Personnel Advisory Commission, they ended up deciding on a 4% merit. I believe that's a good balance between what was suggested and what we can afford at the same time. So speaking for the general fund, that is the primary operating fund. That's the fund that most residents will identify with. It houses the fire, police, library, parks. And this year we're budgeting roughly $63.3 million. That's an 8% decrease, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is the sales tax, as I talked about. We're going to budget the sales tax at 90% of FY22, hoping to have a little bit of a recession-proof. We also had the bond proceeds that were in there. When we refunded bonds, we actually paid those out, so you'll see that the revenues were somewhat inflated for those bond proceeds. And then also, we've also received quite a few federal and state grants through the COVID years, and this year we do not have those in there. Also, the state has also lowered their sales tax projections. So you can see that we do have this decrease. So 55% of property tax. When I started 16 years ago, that actually was at 62%, and we have had a slight shift in where the funds come from. I'll talk about it a little bit more. But the main thing about it is over half of the revenue in the general fund comes from a very stable source, and that allows us to have a very consistent year-over-year trend. So the property tax rate this year is $1.6732. That is called the recapture rate. It's actually set by the state of Tennessee. If we were to exceed that, then it would be considered a property tax increase, but I am very happy to say that this is the 6th year of a no property tax increase. We used 99% of the 4 pennies that we had allotted for appeals. You can see that it's slightly down from what we had earlier, but again, it's basically the same, but slightly rolled back. And it will be called the recapture rate if anybody ever asked. So you can see how sales tax, the property tax is broken down. The main takeaway for me on this slide is under public safety with 69 cents of the $1.67 goes to public safety. That's 41%. And that's a good number for our community that puts a high priority on public safety. So one of the things we did is we looked at the Memphis real estate report to see what the average home price was selling in Germantown right now, and that's $500,000. So what we did was we broke down a monthly tax bill, and that would be $174 a month. And then we looked at the top 5 activities that make up that tax bill, and number 1 being police. So $43 a month is roughly what you would pay for police. Oops. Fire is roughly $28 a month. GMSD is just over $20 a month. When I sat down and really thought about this, and I thought about taxes for value, and you think about $43 a month going to police, this may be actually your lowest bill that you actually have. Your cell phone bill, your cable bill, all of those items, grocery bills, everything is probably more than the $43. So when you talk about the public safety in this community costing less than your cable bill or your cell phone bill, that's pretty good value for this community. And then we round out with our top 5. 28%. As I said before, when I started, sales tax was 18% with a 62% roughly coming into property tax. Now we've had a shift. And so those decisions that were made several years back about the economic development around the key commercial districts of the 10% land use have really paid off now. And what we've been able to do is shift that or lift that tax burden actually and shift it more onto sales tax. And so again, that's good and bad. It makes me nervous in the fact that it's slightly elastic, but it does lift or shift that property tax burden, and it means real dollars to the residents of this community. If you, I'm sorry, I need to skip ahead a little bit. But anyway, if you look at the fact that we have rolled back just a little bit, I think with the recession proofing that we've done, that will really help offset. But again, this is my favorite slide. Of course it would be. I am that nerdy and that geeky, but the real thing is the story behind it. It's very difficult to see, but the furthest bar onto the left is 14, FY14, and it's roughly $5.8 million. And then if you look at 22, the one on the far right, that is $15.5 million. That's 162% growth. It's 162% growth that we have had over the 9 years in sales tax that has allowed us to continue on and give that services to the community without raising property tax, help offset the haul that we lost several years back. And because we are this nerdy, we went back and trended and looked at FY01 through FY11 and saw what the growth rate was between those years, and it was 4%. So we're talking about 162% now versus 4% in the preceding 11 years. So if we took that 4% and projected it out into FY22 and looked at the difference of where we could have been to where we are now, that is a difference of 26 cents on the property tax. That's real money in the dollars of the residents. On that same $500,000 home that we're talking about, that was $325 for the property tax bill. So that shift is monumental, and those decisions that were made by previous administrations and previous boards, and we can really see the impact that it's had on the residents today.
Adrian, I'd give you time to catch your breath. When that economic development strategic plan was implemented, studied, then implemented, and then the results, those are some really, really, really bright and cool aldermen that did that. Continue.
So you can see how the rest of the revenues break down by categories, with federal and state being 8%, and then the licensing and fees being 6%, transfers into. So if we're back at the revenues at 6.3%, then the expenditures are just a little over $63 million. You can see that we are a balanced budget with just a $300,000 surplus. Again, that is a 3% decrease. We are matching the decrease in the revenues to the decrease in expenditures. We also have the bond proceeds that are in there. So if you take out the bond proceeds, it's really a 2.6% decrease. So this is a nice chart. Of course, we had to have a bar chart in here. This is a nice chart that shows the revenues, and you can see how that they have grown, but you can also see how 23 on the right-hand side has gone down a little bit as we have talked about the scaling the revenues. And then when you overlay that with the expenses, you can see that we also drew down the expenses to match too. That way we would have a balanced budget. So in the enterprise funds, those funds are the ones that operate most like a business, and that you have charges and fees that go along with the activities. In the utility fund, if you'll recall that we did pass a utility rate increase, that is not the full measure of that. What you see up there is also $3.7 million for the ARP that is supposed to be for the automated meter readers. If you took out the 3.7, it's closer to 10.3. So it's a lot closer. It's not quite as a big a gap as what we're showing. Under the stormwater, we do also have that rate increase that's in there. The difference between the revenues and expenditures is $1.2 million, and $1 million of that we're going to take towards a capital improvement project. Under the GAC, you can see that they are starting to come back from the COVID years and be a little bit more balanced. One of the things I want to mention is that there is a rate increase this year starting in August 1st that actually went through the GAC Commission, and will be roughly about a $7 average increase. Grade Hall only has a $50,000 transfer in. I believe that had we not gone through COVID, they actually would have broken even by now. They've done a terrific job. And finally, under the sanitation fund, you can see that this one is revenues are less than expenses, but that's okay. It's a planned drawdown. We are in the 7th year of the contract, and it is the 2nd year of the extension. So not only did we get through the 5-year contract, but we've made it through 2 extra years on that as well. All right. So under the special revenue, these are governmental funds, but they are restricted for special purposes. One of the things I want to say is there's not anything of alarm in these funds. If you see one where the revenues are less expenses, that is a planned drawdown. The major one, of course, is GMSD and their general purpose fund. But I do want to highlight the State Street Aid Fund, and I'm going to ask Andy Sanders to come forward and talk a little bit about the paving program this year.
Thank you, Director Royals. The city has implemented a comprehensive and holistic plan for managing our pavement system with our contract maintenance dollars of $2.52 million allocated in FY23 budget. The intent of this approach is to ensure that we are getting the most out of our paving dollars by extending the life cycle of our pavement system. Similar to how you maintain your personal assets like a vehicle, different things are required of our pavement assets. Different types of maintenance strategies are needed in order to properly maintain our entire system. So, in looking at that, in order to ensure that we are meeting the goal of stretching our road maintenance dollars, we've implemented a plan that utilizes the 4 R's of pavement management. And this will be taking our approach where we've had the goal of maximizing 10 miles of pavement. We'll be able to stretch that to include 15 plus miles of pavement impact with this approach that you see before you tonight. The first R is resurfacing. This is the primary way in which we are able to maintain our pavements throughout the city, and the primary way we've done that throughout the years. We're looking at $1.7 million of the $2.52 million going towards resurfacing our roadways. Resurfacing, what it amounts to is basically taking that top layer of asphalt pavement, removing it, and replacing it with a new surface layer. That's appropriate for a large portion of our roadways throughout the city of Germantown, and this process typically extends the useful life of those pavements for around 15 to 20 years in one cycle. With that $1.7 million, we'll be able to have about 6 to 7 miles of resurfacing, which encompasses about 65% of that contract maintenance budget. That's our first R. Our second R is reclamation. Reclamation is a cost-effective method of pavement rehab. What we do with reclamation is we take the full thickness of the asphalt surface and a portion of that underlying base material, and we uniformly pulverize it and grade it to serve as a new base material up underneath that top surface layer. Now, this is appropriate for some of our roads in Germantown because some of our roads were annexed from Shelby County, and they have a base layer that is not necessarily adequate for supporting that top layer of pavement. So because of that, we have to implement reclamation in basically reclaiming that existing asphalt and reforming that base layer and putting a top layer over it. It is a little bit more expensive than resurfacing, but it's needed for some of those pavements, because if we were to continue to move forward with resurfacing those roads, we would have to go back every 5 to 7 years to resurface them again and again and again. So taking that base layer and improving it and then putting that top layer on allows for us to get that 15 to 20 years of useful life that we can get for those type of roadways. So we're looking at about $650,000 going towards our $2.52 million this coming fiscal year. That'll get us about a half a mile. We're looking at utilizing Dogwood Road in Phase 1 of Dogwood Road for reclamation, and that's about 25% of our budget for contract paving in FY23. We look at moving these percentages forward as we keep moving forward in the outer years of our fiscal year as well. So that's our second R. Our third R is rejuvenation. Now, Director Mills and his staff have used asphalt rejuvenation for many, many years. And what we've been doing there is basically rejuvenating the asphalt by putting back in those chemical properties that are lost when you first lay down that asphalt pavement. Those oils and the tack, the asphalt content, when you the moment when you first lay it down, some of that is lost due to temperature, due to sunlight, due to those outside exterior factors. So we're putting about $175,000 in FY23, and that will allow for us to rejuvenate about 8 miles of our roadways, which is around 10% of that total $2.52 million in budget. So in total, this will allow for us to impact around 15 plus miles of our roadways. And then there's that last R of reconstruction. So what we hope is that if we do our jobs right and we're putting a good pavement management program together utilizing those first 3 R's, that we'll never have to do that last R. Because reconstruction is a process of basically replacing the entire roadway network, taking all the asphalt top layer, the base, the sub-base material, taking it out and replacing it with something new, which is obviously very, very costly, even more costly than reclamation. So that's our 4 R's and our approach to pavement management that will hopefully extend our life cycle of our pavement system for many years to come. I'll turn it back over to Adrian.
And finally, we're going to work on the capital budget. So the capital fund is where those major non-recurring expenses like land, buildings, infrastructure, and equipment are budgeted. And Dakisha Fondon's going to walk us through several of the projects.
Thank you. Tonight I will be going through the 8 main categories in the capital improvement program for you. The capital improvement program for fiscal year 2023 totals around 26 projects, which totals $33.8 million for fiscal year 2023. In the general government portion, we have $400,000 allocated towards general government projects. Just to highlight a couple, we will be replacing F171, which is a 2013 tailor-made ambulance for the fire department. And we'll also be doing design work for ADA parking improvements at City Hall and design and construction for the roof replacement at Germantown Community Theater. $1.15 million will be invested into improvements of our major roads. Just to highlight a few in the major roads category, we will be in the NEPA phase for the Farmington Boulevard resurfacing. The NEPA which is the environmental compliance phase required on all federal funded projects. We'll also be in the NEPA phase for the Bay Road Bridge replacement, as well as the Forest Hill Irene south of Winchester. And we will be in the construction phase for adding improving 6 more culverts at Poplar Avenue. Intersections, we will be investing $9.6 million into our intersections category. The bulk of this will be $8.8 million for the construction of one of the busiest intersections here in Germantown. Will be the intersection at Wolf River Boulevard and the Germantown Road. We'll also be doing some signal upgrades as well as a signal installation at Wolf River Boulevard in the east entrance of Houston High School. The largest portion of the fiscal year 2023 capital improvements program is made up in the category of drainage. The city will be investing $12.1 million into improvements of the stormwater conveyance system. This includes projects such as the Duntreef Ditch and the Miller Farms Ditch, which is either American Rescue Plan dollars or funded through the bonds. The city will be investing $1.2 million into our park system. This includes reinvestment into Riverdale Park to address the entrance at Neshoba Road, as well as compliance, ADA compliance. And we'll also be improving the 2 athletic fields at the Johnson Road lacrosse fields. The city will invest $700,000 towards the municipal schools. This includes the first installment for the roof replacement at Riverdale Elementary, as well as the last installment of the Houston High School field house.
So, I got to do the money. Just have to. So, these projects that we've gone through, that Takesha's gone through, are all really paid for out of the general fund. So when we have a surplus from the operating, that money that is left over that falls into reserves is then used to do pay-as-you-go for these projects and projects similar to them. So the city is going to be investing roughly $5.8 million of general fund reserves into these projects. The exciting part about this is that we are actually getting $19.7 million from other people's money. And so what that works out to be is roughly 23% city money and 77% state and federal money. Or you could look at it this way: for every dollar we're investing, we're getting $3.40 from somebody else. And so, of course, I had to crunch the numbers again and look at that. And so if the city was to try to do this same level of investment ourselves, what would that look like? And so it would actually be 99 cents on the property tax in order to continue to do this level of investment if we were not able to go and submit and actually get these state and federal grants. So we would have to roll back the amount of funding that we would be able to do, or we would have to increase that 99 cents on the property tax. That same $500,000 home that we've been talking about would equate to over $1,200 a year. So between the 26 pennies that we were talking about earlier on sales tax, plus this 99 cents, that's $1.25 of savings on the property tax, and still able to get this level of funding and work done. And that would equate on that $500,000 house over $1,500 a year. So it's amazing what the CIP manager and others have been able to do to get basically someone else's money and able to do this.
Stormwater. As Director Royal stated when she presented the enterprise fund budget, the city will be using the stormwater fee to invest more into our stormwater system, to improve the stormwater system. $980,000 will go towards that, and we would use $880,000 to improve the Rico Chico Toro culverts, as well as $100,000 for annual miscellaneous drainage improvements. $7.2 million will go towards improvements of our water system. We will begin the second phase of the elevator water tank to bring the water tank into service, as well as the automated meter reading that will be entering into its second phase, and that will be 100% funded through state and federal dollars.
So when you add on the utilities and stormwater, you can see that from basically city reserves is over $10 million, with state and federal money being $23.8 million. And that's basically a 30-70 split, 30% city money, 70% coming from state and federal. So that allows us to have that total CIP investment of $33 million instead of the 10 that we would be able to do. And finally, as we talked about earlier in the program, about how that one of the areas that we wanted to look at were the four core of public safety, public infrastructure, public schools, and public parks, just to give some perspective of how much money we're spending. In public safety this year alone, when you look at operating and capital, we're investing $29 million. In the public infrastructure of city money, we're investing $32.4 million, and then when you take that state and federal money that we just talked about, that brings it to just under $55 million. Under the public schools, the city is investing $8.2 million, and that is a direct and indirect. That's MOE. That's the in-kind for school resource officers. That is the capital budget, and it is also the debt service and other items. And then in public parks, we are investing $4.3 million in public parks. When you then go back and put on the schools general purpose, it actually brings the total funding for these 4 core areas to 83% of all money being allocated this year are going into these areas. Mayor, that is all that we have. We do have the chair for the FAC, Michael McLaughlin, here tonight, if he would like to say a couple words.
Sure. Chairman McLaughlin, if you could come forward. No need to state your name, rank, and serial number for the record. We know you well, and we appreciate your work. And just make sure it's on green and you have the microphone at the level that's comfortable.
All right. Thank you. First, I want to thank Mr. Heisman, his first year as city administrator in the budget season. I appreciate all your hard work. I also want to thank our budget staff. Y'all do a phenomenal job each year. Obviously, the last couple of years were a little more difficult than other years, but I appreciate that. Also, all the directors, managers, chiefs, for all the extra time they give. Obviously, they're doing a full-time job, then they're having to do a budget, and then most of y'all, some of y'all come to every meeting. Mr. Bill's there. But we appreciate all your work. I would thank the FAC. I think Alderman Ulick and myself were the only 2 present today, but thank you for leading a great committee. With that said, the FAC recognizes their role of the process of establishing the budget as an advisory group, and at this time, we would like to recommend the budget to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman, and I do